This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
So welcome to the final chapter of Path of Daggers. Final chapters. I mean, the last chapter is half a page of Robert Jordan rumors fade to myth prose that there's not really a lot to talk about. So we're just going to roll that together into 30 and 31.
Yep, this is the last episode of Path of Daggers. Obviously, we will be doing Path of Tangents. That will be happening next week as per usual, but this is the last book episode for Book 8. We are here. It is amazing. Yeah,
I mean, Book 8, oh my God. After 5 years, Book 8, I just never thought when I started this podcast we would still be doing this after this amount of time. I really didn't. Like, my mind is kind of blown when I think back to how much has changed in that last 5 years. And that's something we'll definitely talk about more in Tangents. But, wow. I mean, you talk about our characters going from baby Rand, baby Perrin, baby Egwene to what we're about to experience, in this chapter. It's a lot. It's a lot different.
Yeah, we've come a long way, and this book has been so dark and so mature compared to, Eye of the World. I mean, what with the show coming out in the middle of this book, there's so much reason to be thinking back to Eye of the World.
Right.
And where our characters start and what their motivations are at the beginning and why they make the mistakes they do based on where they come from. And just really thinking about that with all the other podcasts that are back in Eye of the World.
Oh, my God. And the way the community around Wheel of Time has changed over the last 5 years, from something where I went out and was looking for a podcast to listen to and could barely find anything. There was no content out there, to now just, we exist in a plethora, an overabundance, a massive supply of content out there.
Yeah. And we are so far ahead of everyone else. It's surreal to look back and see just this pack of other people that are, there's a few people getting out ahead and they're like, woo, in book 6, and here we are wrapping up book 8. It's looking at the wide variety of experiences and looking at how dark this book is and looking at where we are headed next. I'm so excited we're on this adventure. It's so cool. It's so amazing to be exploring these books in this way with this community, in this kind of collective zeitgeist that the show has catalyzed us into this polarized thing. We have the podcast community. We have Twitter of Time. It's all swirling and happening, and it feels so personal because we're in it. And we're so far along in it. And it feels very we're the hero of the story. We're the Taviran of this arc. We're here and we're doing it. And it's so exciting. And I'm just so grateful that I'm here.
And I really do think the slog, I always said the slog is where we can shine. And I do think that's the case because there's so many characters that we take the time to research. And I'm learning so much more about these books at this point simply because I've never taken the time to look up every single character in a chapter before, and
yeah.
I've just brushed over them, and all of a sudden I understand where these random nobles are coming from. I understand what these Aes Sedai, Seafolk, Wise One dynamics are coming from. I understand what's going on with these very minor characters and how that then influences some of the plot lines that I've never caught before. And so I'm really enjoying doing the detail and digging in a way that I never could on just a read through.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I got this massive tattoo. I own all of the supplemental material. I've listened to the books however many times. Every time we sit down to do this, my mind gets blown. It's such a privilege to get to have these books and to be able to just continue to plumb their depths so thoroughly.
Yeah, let's start with these are new patrons as of March 14th. So Connie Dudden, thank you very much.
Thank you to Frank Rigdon.
Kevin McAvoy.
Ian.
And so I think we thanked those 4 already, but I just wanted to make sure in case we forgot them. I'm almost entirely sure we did not thank the next name, which is Masaujan Logic. That's my best guess.
Masaujan Logic.
Mouse Age in Logic.
It's probably pronounced Smith.
Thank you, Smith.
Thank you also to Sushana Jami.
I like it. Thank you, Joyful Division. Wonderful.
Thank you, Claudia Newman Henry.
And Kenton Yates. Thank you, Kenton Yates.
Thank you all so very much. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, and I just want to say one thing. We've had a couple of people who just want to give us a one-time donation. And if you pledge it, you have to wait till the beginning of the month to get charged. You can't pledge it and then change it again, or else it won't go through.
That's the thing.
That's a thing.
But thank you to all of our Patreons, the ones that just came on and the ones that have been here forever. You are all wonderful people. Really appreciate the support, appreciate your engagement on Patreon. I'm trying to drive a little more of our engagement over to Patreon. I appreciate everyone who's responded so far. Yeah, I hope that we are continuing to make content that you all like and enjoy. But you keep coming to Patreon, so I guess we're continuing to make good content. People keep finding it and liking it. So thank you all for the validation. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, really do appreciate it. And again, I'll emphasize over and over again, the patrons keep this podcast happening, right? I know we're doing ads as another revenue stream, but it really is the patron donations that keep us going and keep us able to devote time and effort and mental energy and physical energy and everything else that we put into this podcast. We really do appreciate you guys, especially those of you who come to these live recordings. Like there's a lot of value in having the live feedback and seeing people show up and support us, both monetarily and emotionally,
Yeah, really appreciate all the people showing up to this. I'm very, very happy to have the audience full again. It's delightful. It's nice to know that we're putting out good stuff into the world and people enjoy it. Obviously, the download numbers show us that there's a lot of people who enjoy it, but do enjoy our Patrons being a little bit more engaged than just downloading.
But also thank you to that silent majority, right? Most of you who are listening to this probably have never engaged with us. Most of you just download the podcast and listen to it. And
we do appreciate that a lot.
We do appreciate that a lot. Yeah, that's huge. And for those of you who are able to do that, thanks for listening to the ads. And if you can't do anything else, go ahead and drop a review in one of the. We don't ask for reviews very often, but since this is the end of a book, if you want to go out and give us 5 stars on one of the various podcast apps, please go do that. That's always helpful in terms of spreading the podcast around and helping people find it. A surprisingly large number of people just type Wheel of Time into their podcast app, and that's how they find us. So
yes, if nothing else, if you enjoy our content, please give us a review. It would really help us reach more people. And yeah, just keep coming back and listening to it, because that's what gives us the warm fuzzies, is seeing that spike every week when we drop a new episode. It's really, really gratifying. So really appreciate all of you out there who are just listening to us yell about shit while you are on your commute or whatever. I appreciate you.
All right, well, let's dig into the chapter.
I don't know. I don't want it to end. No, I do. I do. I am excited to. There's something, there's the senioritis element of all right, let's go on. Let's move on.
There is a certain amount of revenge procrastination of oh man. And then we have Winter's Heart, and then we have Crossroads of Twilight. And I'm really looking forward to Knife of Dreams, but these next 2 books, man.
Yeah. These next 2 books are, we have to get through them in order to get to the reward that is Knife of Dreams. As much as we're making the most of the slog and having a good time with it, there is definitely a sense of we are getting through to Knife of Dreams.
Yeah. And the cleansing won't be as soon as you think, because we are going to move the chapter with the cleansing. We're going to put that one off until the middle of Crossroads of Twilight to do it in chronological order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cleansing is going to be held off the way it should have been if we had been in charge of organizing these drafts. So, but yeah, let's
do chapter 30, Beginnings, and our symbol is the wolf, because there's a lot of parent in this chapter.
Ow!
And Beginnings, as I was, I think, saying to Aradia before we started recording, there's a lot of foreshadowing for really exciting plot events. So clearly, this chapter is going to set up some of the most exciting events in the book. Oh, wait. It feels like they should be some of the more exciting events, right? You have the kidnapping of Fael, and that should set up a really exciting plot point with Perrin confronting the Shido. It just takes too long to get there.
Just gotta wait for it.
Yeah, you got the Gawain starting the battle with the White Tower, which feels like that should also be pretty fucking epic, and instead ends up with her being like a servant in the tower.
It's a siege with a bunch of like Nelson Mandela political stuff instead, and then the big climactic battle is with the Shan instead. Like, Egwene still fights an epic battle at the White Tower. It's just not against Aes Sedai. So, little weird.
And then you have Massima, who, like, again, feels like he should be a bigger issue, but instead he just sort of follows along and doesn't really cause that much trouble. I don't know.
He's a knife held at Perrin's side for a really long time, and then he ends up being diffused at the end instead. He creates this tension that just goes away.
Right. Well, and in fairness, it is one of Fael's crowning achievements.
It is. The moment she stabs him is perhaps the moment that a bunch of people fell off of the fence onto the side of loving her.
Right. And Keith brings up a point. These all get resolved in Knife of Dreams, and that's why the next two books kind of feel sloggy, is we have all these setup storylines at the end of Path of Daggers that you're like, oh, I can't wait to see this resolved in the next book. And it's like, no. Not the next book, not the book after it, but the book after that is when these get resolved. I've often described this part of the books as being like the Google car, where you can like pan in 360, and it's just Jordan driving around in his world in the Google car, and the plot is just you looking in all of the directions. And the next two books are really hardcore that, with the exception of a couple of big battles. But like, it gets more like a normal book again in Knife of Dreams, but the next two books are really just this like 360 bubble view of the whole world that he built, which is in so many ways the least sloggy thing he could have done, because you actually get the granularity that fleshes out the world to the degree that people can make fucking podcasts for days about it. Right.
You know, I mean, the slog is not a lie in the sense that it is a real experience, but it is a lie in the sense that it's not bad. Calling the slog is not a synonym for the bad part of the books.
We're reclaiming the term the slog. We're not saying the slog is bad. We're just saying the slog is a different pace. It's a different way of storytelling. And again, when you waited multiple years between books, there was some disappointment there, right? Like, I was disappointed to not get any Matt in this book. Now I'm like, great, we're getting a bunch of Matt next book. I can't wait, right? That's one of my favorite parts about the next book, is it is bringing back all the Matt in Ebu Dar, all the Golem stuff. Like, there's a lot of fun stuff with Matt in the next book, and I'm really excited to get to that.
Yeah. Slog means something different when you don't have to wait for the next book. It's still there in a textural sense, but it's not there in an emotional sense in the same way. So, yes, with all of that said, let's quit dicking around and just
actually
do the chapter.
Holding his fur-lined cloak close with one hand, Perrin let Stair walk at the bay's own pace. The mid-morning sun gave no warmth, and the rutted snow on the road leading into Albia made poor footing. He and his dozen companions shared the way with only 2 lumbering ox carts and a handful of farm folk in plain dark woolens. They all trudged along with heads down, clutching at hat or cap whenever a gust rose, but otherwise concentrating on the ground beneath their shoes. Behind him, he heard Neild make a ribald joke in a low voice. Grady grunted in reply, and Balwer sniffed prissily. None of the three seemed at all affected by what they had seen and heard this past month since crossing the border into Amadisia, or by what lay ahead. Idara was sharply berating Masuri for letting her hood slip. Idara and Corell both wore their shawls wrapped around their heads and shoulders in addition to cloaks, but even after admitting the necessity to ride, they had refused to change out of their bulky skirts, so their dark stocking legs were barred above the knee. The cold did not seem to bother them in the least, just the strangeness of snow. Corell began quietly advising Cyanid as to what would happen if she did not keep her face hidden. So a few names in that one.
Couple.
Hopefully I didn't butcher them too badly.
Well, you dyslexia'd the name of the town. It's Abila.
What did I say?
Albia?
I did dyslexia that, yeah.
Which I completely understand because I had to work so hard to figure out how to read it because I know how it sounds in the audiobooks. I'm like, I know the sound is Abila. Why but I keep reading Albia? And I finally made it make sense in my head visually. But yes, Abila.
So I used to play this video game way back in like the 80s called Odyssey Legend of Nemesis. And if you've heard of that, you are in a very niche level of Mac gaming. And in the first island, there were two towns called Nyack and Elba, which backwards are Cain and Abel. And for some reason, and this Elba and Albia, for some reason, I can't separate those in my head.
No, that's fair.
But that was a fun little game where it was a role-playing game, and you were on a archipelago, and each archipelago was a dark wizard was experimenting on the people, and so each island had a slightly different thing wrong with it, and you had and it was sort of a puzzle RPG game, but it was also had a lot of like biblical references and a lot of sort of story references. It was all sorts of, each island sort of had its own little corruption of a classic story. And so on the first island, there was these two, Alba and Nyack, which are Cain and Abel, and Cain was this violent town with lots of weapons who attacked anyone who came near, and Elba was like the peaceful town, and they were at war with each other, and they didn't like each other very much, and they were just essentially given an irrational hatred of each other no matter what. That's a tangent, but
Tis
a tangent, yeah. So one of my favorite games, I would still sit down and play it if I could find a computer that it would work on.
Are you sure it's not like on Steam or whatever?
No, I mean, this was a niche Mac only game from the early 80s.
Gotcha.
I was able to run an emulator and able to emulate Mac OS 9 and play it for a while, but that's since broken. But the source code is freely available.
So what's actually interesting about this? Time check, the past month since crossing the border into Amadisia?
Yep, and so that has been a month since Chapter 10, when we last saw Perrin.
Okay. And
that was only 4 days after the taking of Ilion. So it's only been slightly more than a month since Rand took Ilion, which again was the sort of the end of the last book, beginning of this book. So that gives us a timeline for this whole book of being about a month, right? If last book was a week, I think we decided it was 10 days, which is a week in Randland time. This one is a full month.
Okay. And a Randland month, which is a lot more than a month in our sense of counting, because...
I don't know that. Is a Randland month 4 Randland weeks? Or is it still 30 days? Is it 30 days or 40 days?
Really good question. I don't know. I have no idea. I just assumed that.
You just assumed it was 30 days?
No, I assumed it was 4 weeks.
So, yeah, I don't have an answer to that right off. Yeah, I mean, they still have our moon, so maybe it's just you only have
3 weeks.
3 weeks in a month. That makes sense.
It seems more challenging to fit to the 28.5-day moon cycle to have a 30-day month every time. I don't know. I'm not good at this math.
Well, a 28-day month makes, to me, more sense than a 30 or 31-day month, right? because if you had 28-day months, that would actually work out to 13 28-day months with one extra day.
Yeah, but the number 13 is bad, and the moon is bad, and roving holidays are bad, and so we can't have that, except for all the people that do. But they're bad, so...
I mean, 13 isn't a great number in the Wheel of Time, so having 13 months.
Yeah, a lunar cycle for the Wheel of Time world would make a lot of sense.
Well, there are 28 days to each month. There are 13 months in the year.
There we go. And no, they can't have broken the moon, because if that was true, then we'd have a broken Earth type situation, to respond to chat. So they have 13 months, because
they do.
Month is moon, and they have the same moon as us, and the breaking did not affect the moon, which is surprising, really. They could have had lunar colonies, given what we know about the Age of Legends, so... The moon could have been affected by the breaking, but apparently it wasn't. RJ decided not to go there.
If you can travel anywhere you can see, and you can see the moon, right? Like,
it's not that far away. It's not that far away.
I mean, with good telescopes, and you have like the ability to have really great optics when you're using the power, because you can create pure air lenses.
Mm-hmm. Right?
You could have really great telescopes that would be able to see like distant planets on other stars. That could have been really cool.
Dude, you could just have a gateway letting you look through a space telescope. If you could get a space telescope up there, you'd just have your little observatory. Like, it would just be a special kind of gateway that just let you look at what was there. Like, they could see anything.
I'm telling you, you combine modern science with the ability to channel, and you can do so much cool stuff.
The breaking would have affected the whole solar system, if not this entire branch of the galaxy, honestly, depending on how far they had gotten, But clearly they didn't, because Earth is the only place that any of this is happening. Clearly. If it's even Earth. So they've been in Amadisha, and what they've been talking about is all the sort of things they've been affected by are the atrocities committed by the Prophet, right? All the murders, the wiping out of towns that the Prophet, and even maybe some of the White Cloaks have done. And regular bandits and other warlords and random Dragonsworn and little fiefdom armies and lords people and But they're heading towards the Prophet, so more and more of the violence is being done by the Prophet's people. The closer they get to their goal, the more and more it is the Prophet's violence that they're seeing.
Mm-hmm. So Masuri is being punished for letting her hood slip. Now, for a second there, I was like, wait, is that the Dark Friend? Because remember that Dark Friend when... Oh,
Saritha. With Elaine, to the Kin's farm.
Yep,
with the bull thing. Yeah.
So for a second, I thought that's what they were referencing, but clearly not. And Masuri's not a Dark Friend or anything like that. Yeah,
no, it's just an honest accident, which she still needs to be beaten for, because it is still a life or death thing. It's more of a life or death thing than in the other case. But yeah, it's same move, but what Saritha was pretending to do is what Masuri actually did.
And the one thing I'll say that's pretty remarkable is Perrin doesn't have any Dark Friend Aes Sedai or Ashaman with him.
That is interesting.
Right? He's really the only one. Like, everyone else is dealing with Dark Friend channelers, and he can actually just trust his channelers. Yeah, that is... How did he manage to not have a Dark Friend? Ta'Veren? I mean... all the other Ta'Veren have Dark Friends? Well, okay, does Matt have Dark Friends? Not close to him. No, none of his close-in people are Dark Friends. And with Rand, how could he not? Because he's the dragon. Dark Friends are going to be gravitating towards him. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is just Ta'Veren. Egwene has lots of Dark Friends, but she's in such a position of power. Again, how could she not? No amount of anything could stop the Amerlin seat from being the target of Dark Friendery. Aravine, Keith. That's her name. And that is someone who comes with Fail. So she's not really part of Matt's thing. She just kind of gets absorbed into the movement of the Horn under Matt's auspices. It's not the same thing at all. Perrin's auspices or Matt's? Matt's. Oh, but Perrin doesn't really bring Aravine to him. She comes with Fail. So his Ta'Veren filter
thing wouldn't really apply because Aravine got bonded to Fael in this like completely un-Perrin related way. But yes, Aravine is like the one dark friend that we do end up with. And she really doesn't affect Perrin. She ends up threatening Fael's life through her dark friendery, but she really is focused on the Horn, and that affects Fael alone. She doesn't ever actually go after Perrin in any way. And yeah, Fael will be meeting Aravine next book, or whenever it is that we rejoin her after she gets kidnapped.
The next bit I have is Elias talking about, of course you'll pay. He's saying basically for leaving Fael behind. And that's the whole conversation between Elias and Perrin that's been ongoing, where Elias has been saying, she's Saldean. You have to yell at her. You have to be tough with her. You cannot be simpering. You have to, the whole classic Perrin-Fael relationship problem. He's finally figured it out because he's finally listening to Elias, his mentor.
Right, because Elias is an older man who's been in a relationship with the Saldean woman, and Perrin's at his wit's end. So he takes this advice, he tries it, and Fael responds
as we see from her POV.
And he's like, holy shit, that's working, what? And so Perrin's just kind of like blown away by the results of that experiment.
Yeah, never date men under 30. They don't know what they're doing.
I mean, it works out occasionally, but yeah, it's that's a toss of the dice.
as now that I'm 40, I can say that.
But yeah, it's this whole conversation is just really it's RJ's writing of relationship dynamics. It gets really eye-rolly. Like, I'm going to sprain something if I get too deep into discussing how much this makes me want to roll my eyes. I imagine everyone can imagine what I'm going to say, so I don't need to get too on my soapbox about it. But it's just fucking communicate. His nose never lied. Perrin. Okay, there is a difference between objective truth and how people feel. There is a difference between empirical data and the end result in terms of your relationships. Like, you need to talk about it. Your nose doesn't lie is not a replacement for communication. He's
the shittiest empath of all time. He knows what you're feeling, but he interprets it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has such an amazing power. He has so much ability to have this extra level of insight, but he thinks that it replaces the entire concept of communication. And it's just, he could be doing so many cool things with it. It's so frustrating to see him wasting this potential, He could be asking such insightful questions by noticing that there's hurt she's trying to hide. But instead, he's just like, oh, she's hurt. I think I should go self-flagellate. It's just, oh, God, there's so much cool stuff he could be doing.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think as he gets older and as he matures, he's going to be able to better empathize with people and better understand where they're coming from. But it's his immaturity as a young 20-something that he's like, well, they have these emotions. I wouldn't have those emotions. What to do? I don't know. Like, there's no understanding that people are coming from a different perspective, from a different background, from a different culture.
Yeah. And as Bambi is saying in chat, when you give a teen uncontextualized emotional info.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, yes, absolutely. When I was 20, I thought I knew everything and I could interpret everyone's thoughts and communication. The realization that other people are having genuinely different experiences is sinking in really recently. Right. And I looked up to all of these characters when I first read the books, right? Because I first found the books when I was a teenager. So 20-year-olds are adults when you're 13, right? They are adults. They are the adultiest adults that ever adulted. And oh my God, they're so wise. And so I do have to temper my frustration with the realization that they are now idiot children compared to where I'm at in my emotional arc. They are no longer people I should be looking up to because they are no longer older than me. And I have a little more perspective.
Now I look up to Elias and Ruark
Tam.
and Tam and
Marin.
And even Codswain on some level.
On some level. She has lived through some shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her real cynical, like, I'm sick of dealing with these children's bullshit. Like, I feel that in a way that I never, ever, ever understood when reading through the first time, right? The idea that she's kind of mean to them because they kind of deserve it because they're kind of being dumb. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to like, what? No. Rand's trying his best. You can't be mean to him. It's like, no, he's being a sulky little baby.
I don't have much empathy with Codswain, but I'm also, almost a decade younger than you, so.
I've got some cynicism coming out, that's for sure.
Well, I've always been cynical, but, tempering. There's naive cynicism and there's more worldly cynicism, and there's a world of difference. My goodness. Turning 30 was one of the best things I ever did.
Better than the alternative of not turning 30.
You remember that movie 13 Going on 30?
No.
Oh, I mean, it was a girly rom-com thing, but it was...
I've heard the phrase, but...
It was basically the girl is 13 and she really wishes she could be 30 because she sees this, magazine article about, all the cool things that happen when you turn 30. And her mom's like, oh, honey, you don't want to be 30. And then, this magic dust blows out of a dollhouse and she magically gets transported forward to when she's 30, but with the perspective of a 13-year-old. And then that's where the bulk of the movie happens. She learns a bunch of life lessons about romance and sex and body image and business and blah, 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 because apparently she's a terrible person. And her 13-year-old self was horrified by what her adult self does. And then when she gets popped back into her 13-year-old self, she, goes for the other boy, and the movie ends on a happy note.
Yeah, I saw that movie when it was called Big.
It is very much like Big, but with a lot more girly rom-com energy.
Okay, yeah. Fair.
But yes,
Fair.
It is basically Big. It is basically Big, yeah. And yeah, it's just all about girl relationships, and it's the girl version of Big.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of funny looking screenshots with Jennifer Garner looking at adult women's clothing being like, what the hell is this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, her performance is very believably a 13-year-old in a grown woman's body. She interacts with another 13-year-old girl at one point and it's just like, I have boobs. It's a whole, it's amazing. It's so funny. Yeah, I forgot about Big. It is literally Girl Big.
So Perrin is on his way to take Massima to Rand. He's trying to get through Abalo without causing basically a ruckus, without fighting his way through Abalo.
He needs to get to the Prophet in order to bring him along, but he doesn't want to fight his way in. He doesn't want to lose people. He doesn't want to start out on the wrong foot. He doesn't want to start a riot. It's very delicate, surgical delicacy. And
so we get a lot of description of the town, walking through it, the sort of... It reminds me of just it's very depressing, sort of a depression era, Russian town with everybody's sad. There's a lot of snow turned into slush. It's economically depressed. There's a lot of fanatics. It's just, it doesn't feel good. It feels like a really crappy town.
And there's burned out buildings. We get multiple descriptions on the way into the town and once we get into the town of there being burned out buildings that are charred and covered in snow. There's holes in the city where buildings have been torn down. It's very... There is an active war, rebellion, turmoil, chaos happening. And it's, very, food is scarce, morale is low, everything is ruined, and there's a madman just living in the governor's house or whatever. And Perrin is walking through this just creepy, quiet, very tense, bright, fevered eyes, sharpened blades, minefield, being don't be aggressive. I'm a wolf with a bunch of armed people trying to go do a negotiation. Don't look aggressive. Don't look aggressive. It's very challenging.
Balor goes off on his own to find out what he can. Perrin's insistence that for a secretary, he managed to learn a surprising amount. He's a spy, Perrin. He's a spy master. He's always been a spy master. He always will be a spy master. Figure it out.
And like, he's not worried about Balor going off on his own. He's like, no, he's fine. It's like, really, you're trusting your secretary to go off. You're not putting this together that he's a spy who can take care of himself. Like, yeah, Perrin, you're so blind sometimes.
So they ask directions to Massima's house. You get a lot of sort of what Massima does, where he stays in shitty accommodations or good accommodations. He eats whatever food he's given. He doesn't really make a lot of demands. He's not much of a diva.
Yeah, and Perrin has almost the same thought as Nynaeve when Nynaeve met with him a couple of books ago, that the man had made too many widows for that charity to widows to count very far with Perrin. Nynaeve has almost the exact same thought, and I'm just like, yeah, that Two Rivers stubborn streak and this Two Rivers morality, they're just integrity of the Two Rivers really shows.
I would say more the morality than the stubbornness. Just the
you think of, that's what I'm saying, is you think of the stubbornness, but this is the other part of it is they're just straight shooting, we'll never screw you over. And
I'm glad you brought up the whole Nynaeve journeying to see him, because this does feel like, I was like, why does this chapter feel so familiar? I'm like, oh, this is exactly what Nynaeve did as she journeyed in to see Massima. And I was almost expecting the queen to be there to give him her earrings again, right? There's so much similarity between that chapter and this chapter. I was actually, I think in my head, confusing them a little bit because the descriptions are very similar. And the threat feels very similar as well.
There's even a callback to Nynaeve's experience when it says everyone from ladies in silks to beggars in rags come to Massima. And it's like, we saw a lady in silks the last time that we came to see Massima. There is yes, we know that is for a fact a thing that happens. But yes, it definitely feels like a bit of a recycled scene, and it's fun seeing Perrin respond in ways that are characteristically Two Rivers, the same way Nynaeve did. Just I don't think that your intentions are good, because he really is a diva. He's just a very unique kind of diva. He's still a fanatic, getting lots and lots of people riled up and killed. He's just doing it in a way where it's no, I'm not. I mean, Valda in the show, call me child, don't call me sir. And it's it's still a power move, even though it is technically an infantilizing word. Making her say that is a power move where she's in the powerless position. So Massima does the same thing. I'm nobody important, and I will kill you if you forget to phrase it otherwise.
Right. In the name of the Lord Dragon, I'm going to tell you. I'm not telling you what to do. It's the Lord Dragon that's telling you what to do. And that is, I mean, an example of religious fanatics everywhere. In the name of our Lord.
All the time. All the time.
But when someone comes to him and says, hey, this is actually what your Lord Dragon wants, he's like,
I don't know about
that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do that.
I don't think I agree.
I don't think I agree with that. And it's who, and the other thing to talk about is the fact that he is probably being visited in his dreams by a Forsaken who's dressed up as Rand.
Do you think that that's happening frequently, or it's just happened a couple of times a long time ago and he's just spinning out?
Yeah, we don't get a lot of detail about how, I believe it's Grendel, right, who's coming to him in his dreams.
Yes.
In sort of the mask of the dragon. And so that's one of the things that's driving his fanaticism, is he does think the dragon is talking to him in his dreams.
Yeah, we do get an example of that happening later on, and there's no way of knowing, but I'm so curious about how often he's getting those dreams. How much is Grendel micromanaging him versus just sort of setting him on, winding up his little spring and just letting him run, and then picking him up and winding him up and setting him in a new direction when she has to.
Do we know when we get that reference?
Oh, much later. It's near the end of Massima's total arc. I think it might be into Sanderson territory.
And I'm wondering how much of that is retconned.
It could be. But yeah, he has like a dream about like a shining figure coming to him and saying to kill Perrin. And that's why he sends Aram with the express order to kill Perrin in the battle. So it's right before the Battle of Malden.
Yeah, so it's actually the Gathering Storm prologue. Rand appears to Massima and tells him to kill Perrin. Massima sends Aram to do the job. Solidly Sanderson territory, and never in a Jordan book do we get that sort of reference.
I do think that Grandal talks at some point about manipulating him. Like, it's implied, I think, but the actual, like, shining figure in a dream thing is pure Sanderson and from Massima's perspective. So, yeah.
I headcanon that she's, popping in, every month or so and being like, go fuck up your country, right? Like, yes, you're doing a good job. Keep doing it, Ever since Let the Lord of Chaos Rule, I think that was one of the things that Grendel has been doing, is getting the Prophet to really fuck things up.
Interesting. I've always had canon that she just set a few seeds in his brain and just let him run until she needed to pick him up, like however many months later. I'd never considered that she was regularly messing with him, but I kind of like that more, that's just one of the things she does periodically is go in and adjust. I kind of like that headcanon more than my unconscious, unthought headcanon.
Yeah, and again, this is very headcanon-y because there's very little evidence of that in the text itself, but it would explain why he's so fanatical. There also might be a little bit of compulsion, right? Grendel never lets an opportunity for compulsion go by without using it. So,
oh, yeah. He's definitely got compulsion from the first few times. Like, however often she comes by, she definitely sets some things permanently. Plus, he was really traumatized by Flicker Flicker and Falma. So, like, right. He was very organically ready to be reprogrammed when she got to him at first. So, he could be keeping himself spun up.
And we saw that conversion when he went from hating Rand to Rand being the Dragon Reborn and him going like, oh my God, I have to worship this man who I hated. That transition from hate to worship that happened in his head happened organically without any outside influence. So
yeah.
Again, that's where like I kind of like the Grendel influence, but on some level I'm like, it would be more powerful if he had just been doing this all on his own from the events of... I always thought it was after the Great Hunt when they're traveling back. Like, Rand's up in his mountain, and the Borderlanders are traveling back across on their own on the orders of Moraine, and they expect to go...
Like during Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, during Dragon Reborn. And they're going to a town expecting to meet one of her contacts, but it turns out he's dead, and that's why Uno and the rest of them...
Yes, old woman had died, and no one had a message for her. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So, I kind of assume that... And based on... We know where Grendel's palace is, that they traveled past that area, and that's when she first got him.
Yeah, so she at least did that and set some seeds in a mind that was already feverishly headed towards fanaticism. And I think you're right that it is more powerful to give as little of that to her as possible, because we know that there are not Forsaken putting compulsion on all the fanatics in the real world. Fanatics are a very self-starting, self-maintaining phenomenon. Generally speaking, you don't need evil compulsion to make that happen. So it's better to have him be more self-generated, but we know that she got in there and tweaked a few times. It's just, was it a few or several?
And the other thing I want to bring up is strangely, Aram's scent was eager. And we do know that Aram ends up basically buying into the Prophet's propaganda.
It's really sad. The second that I read this the first time, I was like, oh no, we're losing Aram to Massima. Oh no. Like, first time through, I saw that coming. I was so sad.
I didn't, but just because I was expecting a redemption arc from Aram. I was expecting maybe a return to the way of the leaf, maybe a realization that, I wanted something to happen where Perrin used Aram's experience to influence himself. And I don't think we get that. I think Aram ends up, he dies random, he attacks Perrin and somehow is killed by his own side. It's a very weird event for me, Aram's death, and I never really liked the senselessness of it. I wanted it to be meaningful in a way that I don't think it was.
I liked how senseless it was because so many of the deaths are meaningful, and it means something to have a main-ish character go down in this stupid way, because that is the bullshit of war. But I agree that Aram's arc could have gone a lot more spectacular places, and he just drew the short straw of having his story fizzle. And it's shitty because life is shitty, right? It's a very real piece of writing, and it's like, gross.
I read these books to escape realism, okay? Like, that's not what I'm here for.
Absolutely.
So they walk in on Masema. That, they leave some people behind to guard the horses, and immediately Perrin's like, yeah, he's insane. He smells insane. Like, he's been around enough insane people that, like, he knows that quivering, sharp, intense smell that's bouncing all around. Like, immediately, you're nuts.
Like, this is madness. This is not a person I disagree with. This is not someone who's angry. This is not someone who is morally opposed to things I agree with. This is someone who is broken inside and is just spiraling out of control like a steam train that's gotten overloaded or something. Like, and Rand thinks he can put a leash on this? Like, no, you can't, Rand. Yeah. No, you can't. This is like, Perrin looks at him for like 2 seconds and thinks this is not going to work.
And, this interaction between the two of them is actually quite a bit shorter than I would have thought. There's a certain amount of Perrin's like, oh, we're going to travel and it can happen. And Masema's like, no, that's not going to happen. And Perrin's like, okay, then you're going to walk with me. And I kind of expected a more resistance from Masema, more something from Masema. I feel like he acquiesces a little too easily to Perrin's demands.
Well, I'm pretty sure that in the next book, Perrin thinks about how it takes hours longer than he thought to iron out the details of getting Masema to agree to come with him. When he comes back to camp, I feel like he comes back hours later than he expected because Masema was so hard to get to agree to anything. So I'm pretty sure that it actually does take a very long time. It's just mostly off screen. I'm pretty sure. We will see when we get there next book.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the agreement happens early, but then, like, how many people he's going to bring with him.
Right.
There's a lot of negotiations around the group that he's going to bring with him and how big his army is going to be and how many followers he's going to bring with him and that kind of thing. And
then he throws it all out and does whatever the fuck he wants anyway, which is ridiculous.
And we don't get a lot of information about the people around Masema. It's just Masema and his fanatics, right? Can you name one person who's following Masema?
No, and that's actually interesting. So there's a whole paragraph and a half of a woman who doesn't have a name in this chapter. A nameless woman, like, comes to the door and has a smell and has a stately appearance, and she doesn't have a name. It's very weird. This is an amount of character that you would expect to have a name, and she doesn't. And I think there are a couple of Shienarans, I think, that were with him at the beginning that might still be around, but no one ever gets added to that roster. There's just the original cluster of Shienarans who all had names where you can't take away their names because they have them already. But I don't think we ever get... Oh, Hari, who is in this scene.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, most other characters who come up as leaders, we learn some of their aides, some of their allies, and Masema, he kind of just rides at the top of this seething mass of fanatics with no identity other than being Masema's followers.
And Hari, well, we should reference, he was the one who, chapter 10, was cutting off ears, but Perrin couldn't prove it, so he let him go. Hari said, oh, no, I wasn't there. I wasn't the one cutting the ears off, but of course he was. And then he goes back and tells tales to Masema.
Yeah, he basically says, oh, no, this trophy thing was Hari's work. It wasn't me. And it turns out that he is Hari.
He is Hari. That's right.
And then he runs back to Masema and tells Masema what Perrin tells him to say, which is, I'm coming for you and I don't approve. And we're going to talk, you and me. And so Masema is prepared to know that Perrin is in opposition to him, that Perrin is coming to take his power away, to bring him to heel, to bring him under the banner and take away his autonomy to do all of this nonsense banditry that he's doing and being a cult leader warlord.
Which is, again, why I expected more resistance from Masema, right? If he's expecting this confrontational interaction with Perrin, his willingness to agree to travel with him seems very contradictory to where he is in headspace.
I think it's because he has drunk his own Kool-Aid. Because the original transformation was very much like based in trauma, and he was very vulnerable, and he did convert to Randology or whatever. And he's been spun out into being a warlord because of Grandal, I think. But his conviction around Rand really warps his sense of priorities. He does actually truly believe that Rand has to be obeyed in some way. He can't say no outright. He has to say yes, but I think because he really does believe at some twisted level in what he's preaching, and he has to find a way to rationalize it together. Even if it makes no sense, it has to be internally consistent for the length of a sentence only because he's a warlord. But I think that that's what's going on there.
Follow up on Harry. He there's not really a lot going on with him. He helps torture some Shido prisoners in Crossroads of Twilight, and then he's either killed at the Battle of Malden or by Chafael in that group.
I'm going to assume it was Chafael. He seems like the kind of survivor that wouldn't have died in the battle, but Fael's people would absolutely have taken him out. I'm just going to headcanon that unless we find out otherwise.
And I'm assuming he stays close to Masema because
exactly.
He's like proven himself and stuff like that. Yeah.
He's got a name. He's got to be one of the people that Masema actually relies on repeatedly. But yeah, Masema is coming at Perrin in a very antagonistic way, saying, you're trying to take over territory. You have greed for glory. You aren't trying to work for the dragon. There's a lot of antagonism. And spoilers, it doesn't get any better from there with their relationship.
No, and that's, again, Fael is the one who sees the truth and is like, yeah, you have to kill him, right? Like, and there's wise ones who are saying that. There's like a bunch of people like, he is a rabid dog, put him down. And I also like the rabid dog versus wolf analogy, right? That you have like dogs that are just need to be put down. They're no longer tame. They're no longer a benefit. And then you have this wild wolf that can like do it. But it's a shame that it takes Fael to make that decision.
Yeah, especially after Aram gets killed. It's like, Perrin, please go take this fucker's head off. Please, come on. He corrupted someone that you were doing a bad job of saving, but were trying to save. He corrupted him and turned him against you, and you need to kill him. Why? But Fael doesn't let it hang very long at that point. She gets to it before Perrin has a chance to really decide if Aram's betrayal is worth punishing. Before he has a chance to have that conversation, Fael has done it, because, my God, will you get around to it already? Fael gets out, takes like one bath, gets one sleep, and then goes and kills Masema, like immediately.
Yeah. She's like, no, this is a problem. And I like the way they work together, right, is good, right? Perrin and Fael, like they are kind of two halves of a marriage. Like the relationship does work on that level, that she gets some shit done that he can't.
I really like that about them, that they are greater than the sum of their parts.
So Perrin does the whole, I got gateways, we can go talk to the Dragon Reborn, I can have you back for dinner, which honestly would have made me happier.
Oh my God. I can't believe that Perrin gave up so easily on this.
Right?
Like Perrin and Masema both just fold way too fast to be believable.
Way too fast. Like I would want more like, hey, no, like you're going to be touched by the power, and these guys are going to touch you real hard, and you like wrap them up in air and shove them through a gateway. Why is that so hard?
It's not hard. He's got like a dozen channelers almost with him. Like, it'd be so easy.
And you're in the room. It's not like you're not going to start a war.
Yeah.
Because you could just wrap everybody up who's in the room in power. And that was one of the more frustrating things about this chapter to me, is like, why not just shove them through a gateway and call it a day?
I mean, I guess because they don't know the area well enough to make a gateway from that room, but you could skim. Ah! Yeah. No, it's very frustrating how Perrin's just like, here's a really easy, convenient way that doesn't involve bloodshed. Here's a way that's very difficult and involves lots of bloodshed and uncertainty. Yeah, I guess we'll do the second option, sure. Like, this isn't an ice cream decision, Perrin. This is like life and death.
And, from a plot perspective, Jordan needs a reason for him to be traveling through this area, not using gateways, not taking shortcuts, because he needs him to confront the White Cloaks. He needs him to confront, all these things, confront the Shido, be captured. Like, there's all this stuff that has to happen. What I would have liked to see is Masema agree to go through the gateway. They travel back to Perrin's camp, and then he finds out that Fael's been captured and says, hold on, I need to go rescue my wife first. That would have made more sense to me.
So much more.
Yeah, than this whole like, oh, fine, I'll acquiesce to your demand not to use a gateway.
Yeah, especially because of the way that he insists on it later and Masema agrees to it. It's like, couldn't we have just had that conversation first? And because literally nothing else has to change. It's all about the timing of when Fael gets taken that dictates that arc. It's fine. Like, there's no...
Well, and that is a good point. Masema later does use gateways. Like, all the... Like that's
immediately.
That's very...
Immediately.
Yeah, that's a huge frustration. Is because they're willing to use local gateways. Like, he changes his mind.
Yeah, and Perrin decides that it's because Masema doesn't want to see Rand. And he's willing to do whatever Rand wants as long as it doesn't involve actually talking to him. And It's just so bald-faced and nonsense that it just gives me the anger.
Yeah. It makes me want to stab Masema, which, thank you, Fael.
Yes, very much so. Fael, such a cathartic moment. She's so good. Yes, Perrin has this whole, like, how can it be a bad thing to channel if the Dragon Reborn channels? And Masema's counter-argument, he is God! It's fine for God! And it's just like, okay, fanatic, okay.
And his last, I'll just read us out of this POV. I am anxious to speak with the Lord Dragon. May his name be blessed by the light. His eyes flickered towards the two Aes Sedai. He tried to hide it, actually, smiling at Perrin, but he smelled grim. I am very anxious indeed.
Very anxious.
Oh, yeah, he's anxious.
So anxious.
Anxiety, not like anxious to see him, but he's actually got anxiety about it and is putting it off. Right?
I have a feeling that Masema lies as rarely as he can get away with. I think he does lie, but I think he prefers to twist the truth than to just lie outright. So, yeah. But yeah, POV switch.
Yeah, POV switch. We're out of that weirdly frustrating conversation and into Fael.
Would my lady like me to ask one of the handlers to bring her a hawk? Magdan asked. One of Alejandro's 4 hawk handlers, all men as lean as their birds, urged a sleek duck hawk wearing a feathered hood onto his heavy gauntlet from the wooden stand in front of his saddle and lifted the gray bird toward her. The falcon, with its blue-tipped wings, was on Alejandra's green-gloved wrist. That bird was reserved to her, unfortunately. Alejandra knew her place as a vassal, but Fael understood not wanting to relinquish a favorite bird. So, little scene set. We're just riding horses through the snow. We're birding. We're thinking about servants. We're thinking about that bitch trying to get my husband. It's just all very high nobility, feminine, social stuff. You know, the women are off having their plot while the men do their negotiations. The women are off doing their negotiations in a very different medium, but no less serious.
And they're right outside of town, right? They're not very far away. They think they're safe. They don't think there's any problems. They think the Shido are long gone and nowhere nearby. They're not worried. You know, maybe some bandits, but when you've got 40 armsmen, right, bandits aren't really going to be a big deal. They're going to move on to easier prey. I'm not worried about bandits. But no, the Shido, because of Samael's machinations, the Shido were all over the place.
Yeah, and she thinks about the fact that surely there's some truth to all these rumors of Aiel, otherwise the Aiel that she's with wouldn't be triggering so many responses wherever they go. But even Sulin agrees that the Shido are nowhere near here. And she thinks like multiple times about how safe she is, how many guards she has, how secure the area is, how close they are. Like, she just keeps thinking about how safe and secure she is. And it's just like, the amount of hubris and her sense of security is, even on a first read, you should be wondering why Jordan is emphasizing her safety so many times in a single page.
We get a little progress about Magdan and Linny and the whole
yes,
queen becoming servant thing, which, again, from Fael's POV, she doesn't know really what's going on, but we know, of course, it's Queen Morghese trying to establish herself as a servant, and Linny being the one who's actually in charge, and the way it took a strap to do it. And, like, there's a lot of very interesting, like, dynamics that we don't see from Linny and Morghese's POV, but we see it from Fael's POV.
Yeah, it's really interesting to finally see what's going on with Magdan from someone else's POV, because we've only seen it from in her head. It's really interesting to get to see it from outside of her head, and the fact that she's doing a good job of integrating, but also needed to learn that Linny is senior between them because she's not used to that. And there's this is what it looks like on the front, and this is what the public face of it looks like versus the angst that we see. And we don't see Linny beating Morghese in a POV. That all happens off screen, right? Like, we only see some conversations. This is a whole different montage of their relationship that we're getting.
And Morghese and Talonvor are banging.
They aren't.
No?
But
no. She's convinced that they are.
Yeah, and she's wrong. I mean, the way that I read Morghese's POV shortly before they get married, I always got the impression that, like, Talonvor had, like, barely ever even kissed her before that. Like, I very much read the build-up to their marriage as, like, this is going to be the build-up to the first time we kiss with tongue. Yeah, I think Fael is completely misunderstanding the depth of passion that can happen in a courtly romance, a chivalric style romance, which is what's happening with Talonvor and Morghese. And chat agrees with me.
Okay. Fael very much misreading that relationship then.
There's a lot of passion there, but it's not consummated. She's misreading passion as, you know, what she would do, right? They are not as forward as Sildé and farm girls at Harvest.
Okay. I've always had canon that they were definitely, the way he waits for her, the way he's, like, pining over her when she's kidnapped, I kind of always thought that they had consummated the relationship right before she gets kidnapped. Huh. And then sort of she comes back and they kind of get married almost immediately after that.
Yeah, the way that her head is before they get right before they get married, I don't agree.
Okay. I'm looking for evidence for that I'm right. Give me a second.
Okay.
So all of that stuff with Morghese and her POV, that's all Sanderson's writing. And so I don't know, man. I think that might be Sanderson misinterpreting the relationship.
No. I get strong, chivalric, unrequited, like, letters and handkerchiefs at a 6-month lag kind of romance vibes from them. I always have from Jordan's writing. I felt like Sanderson carried that through. Now, you are not convincing me to shake my headcanon in this list. I don't even think it's headcanon. I think I'm on real canon.
That's fair. No, all right. I put my hands up and be like, I took Fael's word, right?
Sure.
I took Fael's word. I was like, oh, she knows what's going on. She thinks they're going at it. She must know something I don't, right?
But
like,
I remind you, she is 20.
Fine.
Per our discussion earlier about 20-year-olds.
But yeah, obviously their relationship is on that path, and her kidnapping interrupts it.
Yes, they are very much a thing. Like, they are a thing. Their mutual exclusiveness is a thing. Like, for sure. They are totally a couple. They just have not yet consummated that in the most physical sense. But they are completely a thing. And I think that Fael is seeing that completeness or seeing that element of it and thinking it means it's a complete relationship when it's still working on fully unfolding.
Yeah, she doesn't really say why. She was certain Magnan had begun sharing his bed. And if she found proof.
Right. Because they aren't actually sharing a bed, but the intensity of their feelings for each other are on that level. It's just Morghese has so much trauma that she still needs to work through that she's not ready to actually let Talon into her personal bubble.
I guess it really takes her finding out that Gabrielle is Ravine for her to admit that, like, oh, these feelings that I have for this abusive man isn't because I'm fucked up. It's because compulsion.
Exactly.
And that's what it takes for her to then, be like, okay, I understand that this isn't something I actually want. And so I can then be in love with Talon and not feel guilty about the fact that I still have feelings for this abusive piece of shit that was controlling my life.
And also the sense of trusting herself. She's like, how could I have made those choices? I can't trust myself to do anything, to make any choices about relationships. What terrible things might I do in the future? There's this fear there. When she learns that it was magic, then suddenly she's able to say, I am a victim, not a dumbass.
Right.
And that really allows her to imagine that maybe she could make good choices in the future. And maybe this thing she wants so much is not an existential crisis waiting to happen. Maybe it's a good thing. But yeah, she needs the revelation about Ravine. I agree that she is paralyzed with respect to Talon until she gets that information. And then she goes pretty quick, like, into being like, yeah, I'm ready. It takes her like a week or 3 at that point to be like, yeah, okay. Now I want you to deal with this, broken person that I am, but I'm ready. If you're here, I'm here. But she has to go through Malden before she even learns about Ravine.
Right. And she gains a lot of confidence in Malden. She has a lot of success in Malden and learns how to be a person and not just a queen.
Yeah, she learns how to be able to be self-reliant. She learns how to survive. She learns how to be on an equal footing with people. And I think she does get assaulted just like all the other women in the Aiel camp, or at least nearly assaulted and then protected.
She's protected. All that group are protected by the men who took them.
I think Aleandra gets assaulted at least once. But she's at least under threat of it. So, like, she's got, like that happens, but that doesn't seem to affect her nearly as much as, like, what happened with Valda. Like, right. She gets a ton of strength in herself as a person as opposed to being a queen through Malden. It's, like, it's not good for her, but she goes through a lot of really positive growth despite Malden. Much as Fael does. I mean, they all grow from it, but I think Magdan grows the most just because of where she's at in her arc. Because, yeah, right here, she's still learning that Linny is the one in charge, right? She's still just finally learning how to make tea in a good way. Like, she's baby level good at being a servant. She still really thinks of herself as a queen conforming. There's a lot to go through before she is ready to hear that Ravine is what fucked her up, right? I don't know if that information about Ravine would affect her in the same way now, Talonvor. I don't know. Maybe it would.
I mean, I think that's part of what she has to go through. And I think whether it happened now or later, it would still be significant.
Yeah, I just don't know if it would be as significant now. I think that Malden really prepares the way for that information to have the impact that it does. But I could be wrong.
Then we get a little more from Fael's POV. I love the foreshadowing. In Saldea, the heart of winter could freeze exposed flesh as hard as wood. Mayene did not have a real winter. This was like the last days of autumn, right? Basically being like, and I've heard this from so many people who come from like colder climates, who come to the Pacific Northwest. It's like, oh, you guys don't have real winter here, you know? But I also love the foreshadowing of like, oh, call it not real winter. You're going to get stripped naked.
Yeah.
And you're going to deal with... It's real winter when you don't have any clothes on. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. She even thinks about the irony, like the pattern is laughing at her hardcore. But yeah, it's do you ever read Watership Down?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the phrase he has. People say they love winter, but they don't actually love winter. They love being indoors while winter is outside. And wild animals do not love winter, because for them, winter is cold and miserable and wet, because they don't have like a crackling fire and a house and like, shut the fuck up, humans. You don't actually like winter. You like being safe from winter while winter's happening. That's actually what you like. So Faile is kind of going through that here. She's fine as long as she's dressed warmly, but once she's not dressed warmly, fuck!
It's, my neighbor just went camping and got caught in a cold, like, tent got completely soaked and then had to, like, survive for a couple more days in the wilderness with with everything being wet and being in enough elevation where even though it's warm during the days, it's not warm at nights. And so she was telling me how she kind of had a fight with the people she was camping with just because like she wanted to go and and everyone else still had like either had better equipment or like they didn't get as wet. And so and she was like, in this place where she was like, my temper was gone. Like I had nothing left because I was wet and miserable and cold, and I did not like my friends. Mm-hmm. And there's just like that level of winter. Like if you were not properly prepared for it, basic hierarchy of needs: shelter, food, clothing. Right, 2 of those are keeping you safe from the winter.
Absolutely.
So I love being in my comfy house in the winter, but yeah, there's a reason why we as a species come from a place that's basically tropical.
Yeah, we figured out technology to bring those conditions with us into not those latitudes. That's how humans spread, was we figured out how to make it warm in places that are not warm. It's, having the ability to be cozy allows you to endure a lot of things. Like you can go out and get cold and wet if you know that there's a fire when you come back, right? You can do that. If you don't have a fire to come back to, then it just sucks.
And then we have this whole paragraph, which can be summed up in its opening sentence. By some miracle, her husband, her beloved wolf, had begun behaving as he should. And then we have a paragraph of quote unquote the right way that Perrin treats her, right? He's not shouting at Berelain, he's shouting at her. He's treating Berelain like a child by ignoring her. She can yell at him because he's going to yell back. He doesn't see her as this weak thing that he has to coddle. He can actually like be kind of rough with her and she can tolerate it. Like there's a lot of stuff in here that justifies the way Faile is treated, which in our modern society we still see as kind of abusive. And I think that's why, a lot of people have a problem with their relationship and why it's very hard to see this as a good relationship, because Faile kind of wants to be treated like shit, according to our modern standards and our cultural standards.
I don't even know that it's modern standards. I think it's just cultural. Like, modern implies that people have been violent up until some magical date in the recent past. And like, no, people have been complicated forever. But it is a very specific cultural signature that I think would not be the most common if you were to do a survey of various cultural attitudes towards relationships. I feel like this would be an outlier, I think, for how most cultures have approached gender dynamics. Like, you should fight. What? Like, it's a weird thing. Like, it exists, but it's always considered a little odd whenever it does pop up, like, oh, it's so spicy and wow. And it's just like, oh,
But what I'll say is this paragraph outlines what she wants better than any other paragraph in any, like, when people are like, I don't understand, what does she want? It's all right here, right? This is where she outlines exactly what she wants from Perrin and how he should treat her and why she's hurt and why, because we've never really seen it from her POV. We always see from Perrin's POV where he's like, I don't know what the problem is. And it's like, this is what she wants, Perrin. And, when we talk about the lack of communication, like, why we wish she would just have said this to him as opposed to getting it from Elias.
And I do wonder how much she did attempt to communicate this to Perrin, because I feel like his resistance to yelling at her is often framed in terms of he thinks that that's what she wants or he knows that she wants. I feel like there's an off-screen conversation where she does attempt to communicate this, and I don't know how well because it's off-screen, and I don't know how many times, but I feel like she attempted to do this once, and Perrin's utter resistance to the concept and how much Elias has to drag him kicking and screaming into it is really like to a certain extent, she can only lead a horse to water, right?
Yeah. But I'm wondering how much she said Saldaean women like it this way and didn't say I like it this way.
And we'll never know because it's all off screen. And how immature was she about that? Was she screaming it at him in a fight, or did she sit him down to have a calm conversation? Like, in what context has she attempted to communicate this? I don't know. But yeah, it's frustrating to read about her wanting to have an unspoken agreement about denigrating behavior that is abusive with her partner. Like, I get wanting to be respected, but this is a really twisted way of showing respect from her to him, right? I don't think she's respecting him with this approach to relationship management, because he does not want to be like that. And she's like, well, I'm going to sulk and pout and be a bitch until you figure it out. And like, she says, like, well, I know that he doesn't mean it the way I interpret it, but I'm not going to actually adjust my perspectives. I'm going to intellectually know that he's on a different track, but I'm going to make no effort to actually work on my emotional self and integrate this information in a meaningful way. And I find that very frustrating.
So while she's having these thoughts and they're hawking, in rides some Chathail with information. They basically spied and learned from the local people that Massima is meeting with the Shan-Chan.
Yes, people have seen Rockin' landing. It's a very distinctive Shan-Chan signature style thing.
And we never really get exactly what the relationship is between Massima and the Shan-Chan, right? There's the assumption that they both hate channelers, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. What we do get is the letter that Perrin uses to get the fork root, right? He takes that from Massima. That
letter from Surath that says, do whatever you want in the name of Surath.
Basically. And we know Surath is a dark friend.
Yes, a very high-ranking dark friend.
Is he meeting with Shan-Chan, or is he meeting with dark friends? Again, this is the whole Grendel is influencing him thing. Maybe there's a dark friend connection more than there's a Shan-Chan connection. Yeah,
we don't get enough to really know who Massima thinks he's dealing with. Does he think he's dealing with Shan-Chan or with dark friends? And if he's dealing with dark friends, does he think he's dealing with dark friends because the greater good, or because he's dark friendly, or is it pure compulsion to trust them no matter what?
Or is it just like the Dragon Reborn, in quotes, is coming into his dreams and telling him to meet with these people? Meanwhile, Grendel's also going to Surath and saying, hey, go give this guy permission because he's going to, mess up stuff. He's going to get this whole country ready for you to take over by really throwing it into chaos.
Honestly, that makes the most sense to me. I really don't see Massima doing dark friendly things because, again, he does believe his own story. I don't think he's going to compromise on dealing with dark friends. But Grendel puppet mastering and making sure he's mostly interacting with dark friends that she can feed stuff to, that is so not just clever, but so Grendel specifically. Like, that's a Moghedian or Grendel or Masana style of plot.
So that's kind of where I'm assuming that letter comes from, is that's a Grendel plot to get Massima to throw Amador into chaos so the Shan-Chan can take over, so Surath can do whatever she needs to do, and you have Lord of Chaos type stuff going on.
So you think that letter got to Massima? Are you talking about Amador or Altara? Because Amador's already been taken over. And if this letter happened recently, then I think that what you're saying, but for Altara. Yeah, because they already have Amador.
Ish. I mean, he did say some of it's still in charge of the White Cloak. Some of it's still, King Alrun still has some of those. Of course, King Alrun is being directly influenced by Grendel as well. Right? Elrond? Isn't he under her control completely?
Elrond is the Amadisian king, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was dead. I mean, when they take over Amador, it's just the countryside and some of the White Cloaks that they don't have control over. They take over the capital. Right? I don't remember what happened to Elrond. I think he dies.
How do you spell that?
I have no idea. I don't even know if it starts with an A or an E. I think it starts with an A. King of Amador.
It's an A.
So, Keith in chat is saying he gets Dalco veiled? Yeesh. I didn't know that. But yes, as Luke Blightwalker in chat is saying, the king that she controls is the one that Iturralda works with, Al-Salam.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was getting that wrong.
There's a lot of A names coming up in this conversation, and I'm impressed I haven't fucked one up yet. Now, Al-Salam was not... Oh, Al-Salam was kidnapped by Aleida. Al-Salam and what's-his-face from Ilion both get kidnapped by Aleida. Yeah, Matt and Stepaneos. Al-Salam and Matt and Stepaneos are both saved from Forsaken by Aleida. That's two things that Aleida does that are good.
Yeah. So Alron essentially is just a puppet of the White Cloaks.
Yeah.
And in Winter's Heart, the Shan-Chan defeat him and his army at Jeremel, and he dies in that battle.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
So he's sort of in control of this town, or he's sort of in control of this country, but not really, because he's mostly just a puppet of the White Cloaks, and then he ends up being killed in a confrontation with Shan-Chan. So, okay.
Yeah. But I do completely agree that Grandal helping Shan-Chan take over all of the countries they want to take over, like Altara, it makes total sense for her to be doing this kind of thing with Messima and Surath. Like, to have Grandal's hands on those strings fits perfectly. And we also are getting our complete cast of characters for all the people that go with Fael through her process, because she's about to get kidnapped.
Yes.
Like, we're getting the little head count of all the people that are going to be a real big part of that arc.
Right, yeah. I don't think we need to go through all the nobles and all the Cha-Fael.
They're here.
Everybody they're here. And we'll talk about them quite a bit more when we're in Malden, because we'll spend quite a bit of time in Malden.
Yeah. So Fael says, well, I have to go into Abula. We need to get this information back to the camp. You go here, you go here, you go here. Boom, the attack starts.
Right. So basically, it's almost that, like, dying right before you croak out that vital piece of information. Mm-hmm. Right? That, like, right as she learns this vital piece of information she needs to get back to Perrin, the whole camp gets taken out. Except Berelain escapes and is the one who actually gets back to Perrin.
The one person that gets away is Berelain. It is the most ironic twist that everyone else gets killed or captured. It's Berelain that manages to roll the nat 20 and get away.
Which, again, tells you how effective she is. Like, we give her a lot of shit for the constantly pursuing Perrin, despite his lack of interest. But she's one of the most effective leaders, right? She manipulates the people around her. She gets away from Aiel. Like, she's a very effective person when you look at her objectively from the outside. She's one, like I said, like I think I've said this before, but she's the only ruler that's from the beginning of the books to the end of the books is still in charge of her country by the end of the books, right? Almost everybody else has either been killed, corrupted, turned over, or disappeared, except for Berelain.
Yeah, she is amazing, and she probably, just like Fael, has a really good horse and is a really good horsewoman, and just for whatever reason didn't get targeted by an Aiel who was quite as successful as Roland. Like, I think it's genuinely because they all had a good chance, and there was a lot of Aiel and a lot of chaos, and one of them was going to get away, and it just happened to be Berelain. But it does support the fact that, and then she takes the information back and does really good shit with it, right? She gets back to the camp right away. She gives correct information to everyone. She does not pit the different parts of the camp against each other with Aiel phobia. Like, she's a very effective ruler, and the only thing that she fucks up is handling the whole Perrin Fael thing, which, again, she's in her early 20s. So for all that she's a very suave negotiator and a ruler of countries, when it comes to interpersonal shit, she hasn't had that many real relationships. She hasn't had that many years of life experience. She's not gonna make healthy decisions, probably.
And until she encounters Galad, the prettiest man in all the world, a man as pretty as she is, she's still, and she's very much sees Perrin as a object to a goal to achieve, an object to acquire, not necessarily a person to love. And that's where Fael's like, no, you'll never get him because you don't understand. Like, you'll never be, even though politically it makes sense for you, on a personal level, he will never be that kind of person. He will never fall for you because of that. Yeah,
Perrin's not in this for political reasons, and Berelain's inability to respect that is a really big mark against her, but it doesn't take away how effective she is at doing all the other things. And yeah, she's complicated.
So Fail's trying to get away, and Swallow dies. She gets hit with an arrow, goes down. It's a very tragic death for a horse. One of the more tragic horse deaths. And I think one of the reasons I find it very tragic is, remember when Perrin is returning from Dumai's Wells, and he's like, if I can get Swallow there, then Fail will be safe. Right? Somehow he conflates Swallow and Fail, and to then have Swallow die does really sort of hammer in that Fael's in danger.
It makes you wonder if Fael's going to survive, because Perrin put all of that energy into that when Swallow dies, you're like, oh no, the talisman's gone. Is this foreshadowing for Fael's fate? And it ends up not being, but it does ratchet up the tension for, is she going to be one of the people that dies before? And I fully believe she was dead. Like, the way Sanderson wrote her rescue, I was very unsure if she was being rescued or if her body was being recovered. Like, I was very sure she was gonna die. And part of that is this, because this is a really tragic death after Swallow. Swallow's like, she's not Bella, but she's kind of like Bella. She's been there really early on. She survived. She's like Aldeep.
Right.
Or Mandarb. She's been around forever. And then she just goes down, and it's like, oh no!
Stepper and Swallow, right? Stepper and Swallow. Those were Perrin and Fael, right? They're as synonymous together as the couple.
Yeah. And one of the only really close-in horses that dies. Most of the horses that matter and get names and have a lot of book time survive. Swallow's one of the only ones that dies. Yeah, and that is because Roland shoots an arrow at her, I guess.
We don't necessarily know if he's the one who shoots the arrow, but he's the one who grabs her for sure.
Yeah, I assumed that he was the one that took down the horse and then followed up and grabbed the woman. I assumed that was all one and the same person.
I kind of didn't. I kind of assumed there were bowmen, and then he was sort of wandering on the outside, and he just was for one when the horse actually went down, he was the closest to her. And that's why he was able to grab her, because I don't see him with a bow, right? He's just got hands and feet and knives.
Yeah, that's true. He doesn't recover a knife or an arrow from the horse body. Huh. Yeah, I'm not married to either interpretation.
People are asking about what happened to Jayadeen. I think Jayadeen just ends up stabled in the Kyrian stables.
Yeah, Rand rides Jayadeen to Kyrian and leaves him there, I think. Probably he's in the stable next to Aldeeb after the doorway gets melted. They all reset their horses.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at some point he stops riding horses because he has gateways, and he's just gatewaying around and stuff like that. And
then he gets a horse because it makes him taller than everyone else, even when he uses gateways. It's a whole thing. Yep. Rand and his horses. But yeah, Fael barely has a chance to realize that Swallow has fallen out from under her before she's being attacked by Roland and being taken over with humiliating ease. And he does this incredibly smart thing, which you should definitely do regardless of the climate conditions, which is takes all of her clothes off, because it works in the desert for Aiel, so it clearly should be deployed with no thought at all for wetlanders in the snow. That makes perfect sense.
Well, it's Jito, right? Guy Shine can't wear anything but white. So you have to take off their clothes if they're wearing anything other than white. It's just so... I mean, you shouldn't be taking Guy Shine from wetlanders in the first place. Obviously, that's against Jito, but it's so ridiculous to me that they're just we'll take these people prisoner and they might die because we can't be bothered to adjust for the climate. It's so annoying. I think it's the Shido breaking them. I really do. It gets close to lethal with them. It's real bad. Yeah. Well, and it's one of the reasons why I don't have a lot of sympathy for Roland. Yeah, exactly. You stripped this woman naked in the snow and she almost died of frostbite. Shut up. You get no sympathy. And the whole throwing her over her shoulder and spanking her to keep her awake thing. And it's or you could have given her a cloak. Yeah. Or some warmth. No, I'm no sympathy for Roland. No. The whole, yeah. I like
him as a anti-hero antagonist. He's an interesting character, but yeah, no, his whole like, oh, I might not be the worst person ever right at the very end is like, no.
He's made so many poor choices. He's done so many bad things that like his whole, oh, I guess women shouldn't get raped is like low bar, man. Just super low bar.
Yeah, no. And he even says it here to a Fallon. This is foolishness. We travel at a crawl. There are too many armed men. We should not be taking more guy shine. He's saying it right now. He's doing the thing and saying, this is a really bad thing we're doing. And it's like, I'm sorry. If it's a bad idea, maybe don't do it. Like, no sympathy.
Yeah. Not to mention they're hanging out with the Shido, which is just like, you know, maybe these Shido aren't great people. You think?
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, there's just so much going on and so many bad decisions made by Roland that his sort of redemption arc is like, yeah, Perrin, take him out, please.
Yeah. And like same with Fallon, right? She's the reasonable maiden, but she's still like, no, what can we do? Savannah wants more guy shine. We have no choice. We have no agency. We are not free and clear adult Aiel with the ability to make choices.
We're not bad. We're just following orders. Yeah. We know that excuse just doesn't work.
It's nonsense. And Chiad and Bane do take a little bit of toe on to be like, this is not right. You need to let her go. And then they get told to shut up because they're guy shine. And they're like, sorry, girl. Like, this is the one time that we can't help. And Fael's like, seriously? The two people I would choose to break out of prison with. And this is the one prison that they don't even need guards to keep them in.
And it bugs me a little bit that they agree to be guy shine to the Shido. The Shido have violated so much Jiito that it doesn't seem right to let them take you as guy shine. It feels like, you know, and it sets up later that Bane and Chiad are guy shine to Gaul and that whole relationship. And like, I understand why he did it from a plot wise. Is like, oh, now they're guy shine and oh, now they serve Gaul. And that sets up their whole like relationship and gets them together. And like, okay, fine. I still wish Bane and Chiad had been like, no, this is not right. We will not accept being taken guy shine.
Yeah, and I get the argument about they can abandon Jiito, but we won't, and we've been taken prisoner by Aiel in battle, therefore this is what we do. I get that argument, but it's the Shido, and they're taking wetlanders, and they're using way too much corporal punishment, and on and on and on. And then it starts to feel more like, you know, pragmatic cowardice. So like, well, we're going to die if we fight back. So we're going to say that it's for Jiito, and then maybe our boyfriend will come rescue us and we can make his life a living hell and get him to marry us on our terms. And it's like, I really would have liked for them to do more than like, we'll give you a water back.
Yeah. No, and like, guy shine cannot be touched in true Aiel societies. Guy shine should be safe. They are being abused as guy shine, therefore they're not guy shine. They're just prisoners.
Yeah.
They should be able to fight back. I don't like Bane and Chiad giving into it.
But there's an element of if they rebel, then they are going to be flirting with the bleakness and an existential level of identity crisis. And I can understand them struggling with that and making the not lethal decision.
So here's a question. Would they, if they were taken prisoner by wetlanders, would they become because
they wouldn't have any sense of these people might respect me. They keep saying, even these guys won't go that far. Like, that's something that we get from a lot of the different Aiel, like with Perrin and with Bane and Chiad. Like, well, this is weird, but they won't go that far. Whereas with Wetlanders, they wouldn't be having those rationalizations. They wouldn't have that gray area.
Because, like, look at Gaul. He was taken prisoner by Wetlanders, and he never said, oh, now I'm guy shine.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he was in a jail. He was an Aiel in a cage, right? Like, that was his whole thing. And in a lot of ways, he's kind of guy shine to Perrin, but obviously he's not guy shine, right? He hasn't put away his weapons. He hasn't taken on the white. Like... And I think the same thing should apply to the Shido, in my opinion.
I mean, yes, but you and I and people reading the books have a much better perspective of how warped the Shido are. Bane and Chiad have a lot of rumors and a lot of hearsay, and they haven't actually experienced it. To them, the Shido are still familiar in an alien land. they're not gonna up and change everything and throw their identity and their honor out on the basis of a bunch of rumors that may or may not be true. We're the ones that know how warped the Shido are. Bane and Shiot have to learn that over the course of the imprisonment, and they get more and more willing to help as the plot goes on because they are realizing how incredibly un-Aiel the Shido are. But at this point, they assume that the Shido are just a little eccentric, but they're still fundamentally Aiel, which is wrong, but can you blame them given the information that they have?
Yes, I can.
You can.
No, I understand. Yes, I get it.
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. We get a summary of everybody who's been captured and the fact that they're all naked and how they're reacting to it. And
only women get taken, which it's an coincidence, but it's also real skeety.
Yeah. Tarballen is killed. One of the Chafaiel. He's the only male Chafaiel. He gets killed. Yeah, we get 3 names Chafaiel, and one of them dies, and the other 2 get captured. And the 2 that get captured are women. The one that dies is a man. Yes, but they conclude that that's an accident later. It's not like some weird sex thing, even though it becomes a weird sex thing, which is weird. And then Fael realizes the names that she's hearing. She's sitting there going, but they can't be here. Well, clearly they are here, so I should adjust to that information. She kind of goes through that whole process while she's sitting there shivering and realizing that this is a lot more than just an unfortunate series of events. This is like the Shido. All of that, and she had to hope that the slinking cat, that pouting troll, Tarballen, had managed to escape so she could reach Perrin. Alongside everything else, that seemed the worst of all. It's real bitter. Yeah, there's some bitterness there. It's rough. That is rough. And I do like the way that they come together, not necessarily as friends, but as allies. Yeah. After she gets rescued. I think I would have liked to have seen that earlier. The potential was there. They both have Perrin's best interests at heart. They just have different opinions about what Perrin's best interests are. And when they do come together to become friends and work together, they get a lot of really cool stuff done. And we don't see much of it on screen because we're into like a much more masculine battle Sanderlanche part of the plot. But clearly they are a powerhouse of royal scale domestic efficiency. And it fulfills the Min's vision of the hawk and the falcon on Perrin's shoulders. Oh my God, because Perrin as a king really needs to have multiple powerful women who are working in concert with his goals. Like, that will make everything better for everyone. So that's it for Fael's POV. She's captured and in Malden, and will be in Malden for quite some time. Yeah, there she goes. There she goes. Into that plot line. There he goes. That train has pulled out from the station. Which, again, despite how long it takes in book time, she's only captured for slightly over a month. I think it's like 40 days or something like that. Like, it's, again, not super long. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a decent chunk of time, but she's only in there for slightly over a month, which is, frankly, about the amount of time we just skipped over. Yeah. In Perrin's POV, right? Like, it's a really tough month, though. It's a tough month, but it's not a forever amount of time, unlike the way it feels. But it is like 3 books, so it is forever. Yeah. I mean, it really, when we talk about the slog, it's the slowing down of real time as well. It's something that very much happens, right? The next 2 books essentially overlap in time. And it is a dragging, terrible time for hers, which I think is part, again, the POV thing, right? Like, she's in, somewhere between captivity, chattel slavery, and a work camp, depending on the specific point she's at in the arc. Like, that's a long month. That's a really long month for her. So it's appropriate that we feel very draggy and terrible about it, because that's how she feels about it. Fair. Yeah. So we're going to rejoin Egwene at the moment of transitioning from their month-long stay at the camp to their siege of Tarballen. She's walking up and down the line, surveying all of the various factions and groups and the army and the trainees and the sisters and the soldiers. And she's surveying them because this is the moment. This is when they pop out of a snowstorm. Like, what? And the last time we saw her, she did that announcement, like, they gave her the power of control over the war against Salida. And she said, okay, we're stopping for a month, and at the end of that month, we are traveling to Tarballen and starting the siege of Tarballen. And this is a month jump, just like with Perrin, we're in a month jump, where now she's doing that traveling on today. It's been exactly 1 month since she had that announcement.
Yep, we're not going to spend any screen time on what that month was about. We are just going to skip forward.
A month of recruiting, a month of novice book being open to all had brought in startling numbers, right? Like, so about...
Yeah, we catch up on a few things.
Yeah, a little bit of a summary of what that month was like, but we're skipping over that month pretty much entirely.
Yep, we've got Chesa bitching about how the other two maids got killed, in case we forgot about that. We have, Alana and Varen showed up with the Two Rivers girls, and Egwene is having to deal with, like, her former age cohort friends, like... versus her as Amerlin. The novice book is full to bursting, right? We've got Sharina is now on the scene.
Yes. Who's the first time I think we really get someone who's got the potential to be stronger than Nynaeve. Have we seen the CFO? Yeah. Like, I feel like there's definitely a handful of people who have more potential to be stronger. And like, we have there's a Sean Chan prisoner.
Yeah. Olivia the Damani, who has not been discovered yet. She's shown up on screen. We've seen her, but she has not been discovered yet. And then there's Talon, the Sea Folk apprentice, who we have met because she was in the Bowl of the Wind Circle. And Elaine was, monitoring them as they went through the gateway to go do the bowl. And she's like, holy shit, Talon's really, really powerful. Oh my God. But we don't see people stronger than Nynaeve very often. This is the second person. I don't know if Talon was actually identified as being stronger than Nynaeve at that point. She was just identified as being very strong, but we know that she ends up being considered stronger than Nynaeve in the end. So, yeah.
And again, Sharina is not that strong yet. She just has that potential.
Yes. And Sharina is someone who shows up in Nynaeve's test, remember?
Yes. Yeah, she's in the third time through, right? Yeah,
she is the Aes Sedai advisor to Malkier in that vision.
Oh, okay.
I believe that's how it is. Because there's the discussion with Lan and Nynaeve, but yes, Sharina is implied to be the Aes Sedai advisor, that their daughter is pestering for when can she go to the tower. And so when Nynaeve hears the name Sharina, she gets really shocked, and they never actually interact. That was something I really wanted to see. I wanted Nynaeve and Sharina to have some kind of connection that would justify why that had happened. But nothing ever comes of it, unfortunately. But nonetheless, here is Sharina. She has now arrived in the plot.
Right, a callback to the Great Hunt, right?
Yes. Gareth Bryn's there with all of his soldiers looking very shiny, and he's being reassuring, and he's confident in this. He got the month he wanted. He has the control he wants. He believes in Egwene. He's feeling very confident about this morning in a way that Egwene is not.
And you got, Suan and Gareth Bryn have come to some sort of accommodation, basically assuming they're falling in love, right? Because she's kind of admitted her feelings at this point.
I think that this is mostly Swan making an accommodation in her head. I don't think she's really actually discussed anything with Gareth Bryn at this point. I think that Egwene forcing her to admit that she was in love really helped her resolve some of the anger that she had around that denial, and that makes her less prickly, which makes Gareth have an easier time with her, which is an accommodation. But I think it's just Swan, unpacking her feelings a little bit.
I love this line. The Hall obeyed her because it had no choice in matters concerning the war against Salida, but light how they could quibble over what did or did not concern the war. And that very much is sort of, now her problem is basically, does this concern the war, yes or no, right? Like, she has to justify everything she does in that line. But once she does, she can pass it, right?
Bureaucracy. We love to see it.
It kind of reminds me of passing the budget resolution in Congress. It's in order to get something on the Democrats can pass it as long as they convince the Secretary of the Senate that this is actually to deal with the budget.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's that kind of bureaucratic red tape, horse trading. This is why people hate politics, headache kind of stuff.
And then you end up coming with all sorts of weird justifications about, like, why is this actually dealing with the war? And it's like, well, it's a supply issue, or getting shoes to our warriors is a supply issue for the war, because otherwise they can't walk, and they need to walk to be able to fight, and like therefore I can order the tanners and the cobblers around, right? Like, you know, like somehow making that chain of justification is very important to her. In terms of all the things she commands. And meanwhile, all the people in the hall are saying, no, that's a domestic thing. That has nothing to do with the war. That's just people who make shoes.
Right. This is the childcare is not critical infrastructure kind of argument.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, that is hard infrastructure. That is critical infrastructure this is just as important as bridges. If parents cannot drive over those bridges, the fuck's the point of the bridge? Like, childcare is infrastructure.
But at the same time, like, I can see where people are saying, like, no, childcare, we're not building anything with childcare. That's not a building. That's not.
It might be a building.
That's something that we can build.
If you want to not have asbestos and mold and drafts, then maybe it is a building.
Right.
But yeah, it's that kind of quibbling.
Debate
and classification.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you classify things? And how many months can you afford to kick this can down the road before, shit's on fire, right? Like, this is a war. These bridges are falling down. Like, there is only so many budget cycles you can push this down the road before something catastrophic happens. So that's where Egwene's at also, right? Like, you can only do a siege for so long. Most sieges are ended by a lack of supply or illness, not by battle. Like, that's how sieges work. So there's a real timer on how long she can play these kinds of games with the Hall.
So they go ahead and open up the gateway, which I think is actually very interesting, because we see Rand open up a gateway, and Rand opens up a pretty good big gateway. But here you're really seeing the advantage of women who can form a circle, right? A circle of 13 can open a much, much, much bigger gateway than any individual man, no matter what sort of Angreal he's got, because an Angreal doesn't make your gateway bigger.
Really? Huh.
Pretty sure,
I did not know that. I assumed that more power, more gateway.
As far as I'm aware, I hope I'm not wrong about this, but that's the whole thing, is like, your power puts an absolute limit. That's why they have to have carts instead of wagons.
Huh. I never put that. I mean, that makes sense. I just never put that together. This is the kind of channeling mechanics that I usually gloss over. I'm not surprised I've never thought about this.
But and I'm just trying to make it as an example of how Jordan's trying to balance the sexes, right? He talks about women being more dexterous with the power, even though they don't have as much raw power. They can do finer things with it. I can debate about that. But I think the real advantage they have is the ability to form circles without men.
But presumably a circle with men in it would also be able to make a bigger gateway than any person.
Yes.
Like, circles in general are going to give you more ability to expand the gateway than an Angreal. I could buy that.
And we see that with Andral.
Well, right? Andral's special.
He is special, but he also does that thing in a circle, right? He gets the power. He's in a huge circle when he creates his miracle, right?
That's true. He does require a full circle in order to make that size of a gateway. That is very true. And Romaine is in full Romaine status. They're just Romaining really hard. Yeah. Egwene thinks that their mutual animosity was still her greatest strength in the Hall, which is just like, that is such a double-edged pit of vipers. Like, that is not a good advantage to be relying on. You need something more solid than Romaine salad. Seriously.
Events this past month had only heightened their dislike for each other. They're at each other's throats.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that it's not just a Swan and Leanne situation, but it ends up that this is not subterfuge. This is literally who they are. And I find that kind of disappointing, that these old women are such catty bitches. And people are people.
I mean, will again bring up Congress, right? Like Mitch McConnell and, like these old ass.
I can't believe that they're catty bitches the way they are. I can't believe we have these fucking children being demented, power hungry fuck faces. It also boggles my mind. So I suppose that's a very apt comparison.
Romaine is Congress and the Senate, right? Like, I guess the Senate is probably more accurate. Like, the American Senate and Lorraine are too good of a parallel to not bring up every once in a while.
Yeah. And it's also not a good thing for Egwene to be using as her power base. It's very much the legacy of Swan, right? Having lots of secrecy and mistrust. And like, this is not a bridge building advantage for her to be pressing, right? She needs to go through what she goes through in the tower of building bridges and bringing people together and having an interpersonal relationship and having cross-Aja relationships. She needs that in order to be a truly good leader, because this is just fighting fire with fire, and pretty soon the whole world is going to be burned down. You know, this is not a healthy power base for her to have for the centuries that she's planning on ruling the tower, you know?
And eventually, I think Ramonda ends up winning because she supports Egwene when Egwene's gone. And that becomes her power base, right?
I believe
so. Yeah, and Lelaine ends up falling out of favor.
Yeah. I believe that is correct. And then Ramonda's the one that gets killed during the Sharan attack, I believe.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that it's Ramonda that gets killed in it. And then Lelaine is left holding the buck of the hall, being the one who was out of favor and all of that.
Well, and that's where Egwene finally goes to them and says, like, we need to change how this group works, right? No more secret meetings, no more, like, deadlocking. Like, she does get them to change the basic rules of how the hall functions.
She gets them to get rid of the filibuster. It's impressive.
Basically. Yeah. Oh, that's right. She tries the gateway out.
Oh, and that leads them to her. Yeah.
And they nail her, right? Because she's like, Egwene's like, don't channel, they'll get you. And she immediately is like, I'm going to gateway. Panics and gateways out and gets just lightning.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
So, yeah, they go through the gateway, and I find it interesting that the White Tower is hidden in the snow, but you can see Dragonmount.
Yeah, I noticed that Dragonmount reared black and smoking against a white sky is just such a visual. They're going into whiteout conditions, and they can't see anything except for the black massif of Dragonmount. It's just so striking and foreboding, and oh, it's so good. The yin yang, the black white, the opposition, the drama, the cold and stone.
It's a good visual.
Yeah.
But again, this is a pretty minor little. I mean, this is basically, yes, they go through the gateway. Like, that's that can be summed up. That's the whole summation of this POV. Is the White Tower goes, or the Rebel Tower goes through the gateway to attack the White Tower.
This is the miracle of the rebels appearing on the gates in the middle of a snowstorm. This is the actual moment that the miracle happens in. Le pouf. And that is the end of the chapter.
Yes, not the end of the episode, though, because we are going to do chapter 31 after, with the symbol of the snake in the wheel, or the Mickey Mouse symbol, as some people refer to it. And this is a one-page chapter, which is almost an afterword for the previous chapter and for the whole book.
It's a very just prose sort of piece. It's not really plot. It's not really a normal narrative. It's a very poetic, flowy. Robert Jordan is reminding you of his overall thesis for writing the whole series, which is that rumors fade to myth, ultimately.
Just read the whole chapter. Here we go.
I'm going to read this entire chapter. Winter winds and winter snows slowed the passage of trade across lands where they did not end it until spring, and for every 3 pigeons sent by merchants, 2 fell to hawks or weather. But where ice did not cover the rivers, ships still sailed, and rumor flew faster than lightnings. 1,000 rumors, each throwing off 1,000 seeds that sprouted and grew in snow and ice as in fertile soil. At Tarballen, some stories said, great armies had clashed, and the streets ran with blood, and rebel Aes Sedai had stuck the head of Elaida Arohan on a pike. No, Elaida had closed her hand, and those who survived among the rebels groveled at Elaida's feet. There had been no rebels, no division of the White Tower. It was the Black Tower that had been broken, by Aes Sedai designs and Aes Sedai power, and Ashaman hunted Ashaman across the nations. The White Tower had shattered the Sun Palace in Kyrian, and the Dragon Reborn himself was bound now to the Amerlin's seat, her puppet and her tool. Some tales said Aes Sedai had been bound to him, bound to the Ashaman, yet few believed that, and those few were ridiculed. Artur Hawkwing's armies had returned to reclaim his long-dead empire, and the Shan-Chan were sweeping all before them, even to driving the Dragon Reborn from Altara in defeat. The Shan-Chan had come to serve him. No, he had cast the Shan-Chan into the sea, destroying their army utterly. They had carried the Dragon Reborn away, to kneel before their empress. The Dragon Reborn was dead, and there was as much celebration as mourning, as many tears as cries of joy. Across the nations, the stories spread like spiderweb laid upon spiderweb, and men and women planned the future, believing they knew truth. They planned, and the pattern absorbed their plans, weaving toward the future foretold.
My favorite line is believing they knew truth. So many characters make plans based on information, and that's what ends up causing all the chaos and craziness because they think they know what's going on. I think Pedron Nile is a great example of that.
Yes.
All of his plans are based on what he thinks is the truth, and he's so far off.
He has good information and makes logical conclusions that are woefully wrong.
Elida as well does that a lot.
Yes.
Although from her, it's from more of her, like, twisted, motivated reasoning.
Yeah, and also Fane's influence. And in many ways, the same thing applies to Fane. Fane comes to a lot of very incorrect conclusions from incomplete data. He's a lot more twisted and paranoid than anyone else, and that brings that to Elida. But he also makes a lot of assumptions about Rand and Mat and Perrin that are really not in line with how those characters respond.
Yeah. I'd say one of the things that our characters do better than anyone else is they get accurate information and they believe it. And they come to correct conclusions based on the relatively accurate information they get. Like, they do a better job of that than almost anybody else. And you might say that's because they're young and they don't have all the, like, preconceived notions of how the world works. But I think it's also just, like, there are heroes and that's what that's what makes them good. One of the things that makes them good. Yeah,
it's part of how you know that they are the good guys is that their integrity and their moral compass will always lead them to do the right thing and trust the right people. And that tends them towards making better decisions. And then he's got plot armor built into the world mechanics. So,
right.
But yeah, right. He does also play a lot with how people believe they know truth and make the wrong conclusions. That's, like I said, a huge thesis of the books is the ways that rumors turn into myths and the ways that that affects us and how the Wheel of Time has this foretold thing, but also it takes into account how people's free will goes. And like, it's really a nice way to wrap up this middle of the series book to just be like, this is my point. This is my entire point of writing these books. Also the catharsis of war trauma. But like, really, this is the point, is understanding this way that information moves.
Luke Blightwalker is bringing up a good point that the rumors and the misinformation is the fog of war, which is sort of the theme of this book.
Fog of war for people who are not on the battlefield. Yeah, we're still affected by it. We're still enveloped in that fog. And the mechanism is rumor. Yeah, that's a really good point. The fog of war is not limited to the war itself.
Or the battlefield, you know.
Yeah, well, there we go. There's another book done in the can, in the bag.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Book 8, done. Woo. Okay, I'm going to go have a drink.
We got a Schitt's Creek applause gif. Thank you, Nintalk the Mind Taker.
Yeah, so that was awesome.
That was awesome.
Oh, I discovered a coworker who's also, he had Oathbringer on his desk. And I was like, oh, you know, I like that book. You read anything else by him? sipping tea. And he goes, yeah, I'm trying to get through the Stormlight Archive. They're okay, but what I really like is The Wheel of Time by this author called Robert Jordan. And I was like, I'm also a fan. Yeah, no, I like those too. I'm still not quite ready to out myself as I haven't been at my job long enough to really like talk about the podcast as something. I mentioned that I edit podcasts as a job. I haven't mentioned that I have a Wheel of Time podcast to these folks, just because I'm not quite ready to out myself in that context.
Coming out as a fantasy literature podcaster.
Well, and there's just a little too much discussion of alternate substances on the early podcast for me to really be like, you should go listen to it.
Yeah, it's a very candid podcast.
It is. So I'm really not quite ready to tell people about that. Although, I mean, if they Google my name, they're going to be able to find it. It's not like it's fucking hidden or anything. But yeah, it is a job.
That is cool, though, that you have found another fan in the wild. That is always a good sign.
And of course, it turns out it's the guy I probably liked the most about, of all my coworkers who are, I'm working. Sorry. Thank you. I'm being handed pizza. So.
Nice.
So, of all my coworkers who I enjoyed working with so far, he's the one I enjoyed the most working with, even before I knew he was a Wheel of Time fan. So, of course, Wheel of Time fans are better than everybody else. Like
green flags.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, the person with the most patience and empathy and willingness to teach me is, of course, a Wheel of Time fan. Duh.
Yeah, if there's going to be a Wheel of Time fan, it's going to be the one that you like most.
Exactly.
Of all your coworkers. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, this is an extremely candid podcast, so I can see where there's a little, it's not professional. It's not kosher to be hawking the podcast at your real job.
And it is a corporate job with like national clients and
I'm over here, doing drugs in the episodes. It's fine.
Okay.
Drugs are good. Okay.
I
edit them out now though, because it's just a lot of noise. It's not necessary.
I do think I did try and cut it mostly out of the finished podcast. It's not. The live show is much more candid than the finished version.
Yeah, at this point I just turned my mic off so that way it just automatically gets removed because it's just pure silence and I don't even have to like deal with it at all. I just have to remember to turn it back on, which is, I'm pretty good about usually.
And I figure most of the drug use is hidden among like many hours of content, so no one's just going to casually stumble across it.
Yeah, no, and it's fine. I've always been, firmly of the like, fuck it, prohibition is dumb. Yeah. Like, I'm going to live that ethos, but there's still a time and a place, and constantly throughout the podcast, finished product is not the time nor the place. Though obviously I get stoned while I'm making the episodes and people do get that. So,
Right. Well, and I'll update you on my drug use for those of you who aren't aware. I took 2 months off just because in case I got drug tested. And when I've tried to smoke weed again, I've had really bad reactions. So I am currently not smoking weed, which feels very weird to say. I'm currently not sober because I'm still like drinking alcohol every once in a while. But even then, like, I'm tired. My job makes me tired. For the most part, I don't even want to drink because I don't sleep as well. And sleep is so precious to me right now. So I'm not smoking a lot of weed. I'm not drinking a lot. I'm pretty much coffee is my only drug. So if I'm not as interesting, that's why.
No, you got to do what you got to do. And as much as I love psychoactives and drugs, I don't believe that that's what makes people interesting. I just believe that interesting people are drawn to doing drugs.
Fair.
Like, that's genuinely been my experience. Like, I know so many interesting people that are very interesting while sober, like as a lifestyle. Like, it's fine. But generally speaking, these are people who are sober because it's not working for them for some reason, not because they don't like it, but because for some reason it isn't practical for them. Maybe because they have an addiction problem, maybe because they're having anxiety attacks. Like, I love doing drugs, but the concept that it makes you more interesting is a sad misconception from the drug war.
Yeah.
I think.
But I have learned that my shitty memory has nothing to do with weed. It's just shitty.
There's a lot of things that affect memory.
Right. Anxiety being one of them. It's funny. my girlfriend, Never, she's got really bad ADHD and I have really bad anxiety. And there's a lot of very similar symptoms. Bad memory issues, lack of motivation, inability to get things done. But in a lot of ways, they come from very different sources, right? Like, she forgets to put the dishes away. I can't stop thinking about it, but then I don't ever do it. And like, the result is the same, but the reasons we get there is different, if that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't, because I strongly identify with both of those things. Mm-hmm. Because I'm pretty sure I have both of those things.
Both of those things, yeah.
So no, that separating them out makes no sense, because in my world, it's all happening.
Whereas I'm pretty sure I do not have ADHD, right? Like, I've done a lot of research into it. There's a lot of symptoms that I don't have.
Mm. Yeah, I have so many. I don't have some of the most like classic ones, but so many of the other ones that it's like, the self-diagnosis is feeling really strong with this one.
What I have self-diagnosed myself with recently is dyslexia, though. That I am pretty sure I have, because there's like this whole thing about being able to spell something correctly 1 minute and then not be able to spell it correctly the next. Be able to pronounce something correctly 1 minute and then not be able to pronounce it correctly the next. Right? The way my pronunciation gets garbled sometimes, the way I have trouble finishing sentences sometimes, right? Like, I think there's a little bit of dyslexia in among the way a French class was absolutely impossible for me when I was in high school.
That sounds so relatable. I've often been like, I feel like I have a touch of that, but like, it's not like, I knew like one of my best friends growing up had like really, really bad dyslexia. So like, I'd never had it that bad, but that's very relatable. That's all very, very, very relatable.
But yeah, so and in terms of my job, for those of you who care, I'm finally past the point where I have no idea what's going on. Now I know enough to know how much I need to know, and realizing I only know a small portion of it, but I'm able to actually get some work done without supervision and without help. So I'm able to occasionally be useful, which is very nice. I'm still not always useful, but
that's awesome. I'm glad that you're feeling like you're gaining traction a little bit.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, a little bit. And there's a couple of people who are also new, who've been there as long, if not longer than me, who I feel like I'm already starting to like either catch up with or surpass. So that's a good feeling to be like, no, I actually am going to be good at this. Yeah. I'm not there yet, but I am going to be.
You are well suited to this job. This was a good hire. This was a good choice. Like, it's fine. Good. Also, we have a birthday, apparently.
Yeah, happy birthday, TC
shout
Traveler.
Out. Yes, TC Traveler. Happy birthday to you. I don't know if you actually want that shout out on the podcast, but there you go.
I'll spare you my rendition of Happy Birthday.
Well, I spared you the first 3 lines. Just gave you the last one, because that's the punchline. That's the punchline. But yeah, happy name day.
And we'll see you back next week with Path of Tangents, and that is going to be with Morgan from Podcast of the Dragon and
Egwene Fanboy.
Yes. Who was on an earlier episode.
I enjoyed having him on, and Morgan had to cancel an episode because she was sick earlier. So I just looked back at our guest list from the book and picked some names I liked, and the first 2 people I picked were available. So yeah, we're going to have them on to talk about everything that has happened to us, to the cast of characters, to the fandom, just everything that has happened over the course of Path of Daggers, because we started Path of Daggers at SpoilerCon in October. So there's a lot of retrospection for us to look at, because we've come through a lot since October, one way and another.
We have.
So
yeah, this book has been a real journey for us. Like, we spent, even though it's got fewer chapters, we've slowed down the pace a little bit because they're more in depth, they're longer. There's a lot of content for each chapter. It's these books are the same length as Eye of the World and such, with 2/3 as many chapters. Right? Like, there's fewer chapters, so each chapter takes longer. It's more effort. There's a lot more names. There's a lot more research that goes into it. And we pause for the show. So there's just been a lot going on with us in our lives. So a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, make sure to tune in next week for that. And then we'll probably take a little week breather just for funsies. And then we'll be back with book 9.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?